Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Tiffani Bova with me. Tiffani is the growth and innovation evangelist at Salesforce, and she talks about her special superhuman power as taking stars and creating the Big Dipper with the stars. So Tiffani, thanks so much for being on today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
You betcha. So to start off your story, and I can't wait to get to the end of it, but to start it off, you noted that working at a circus was very pivotal for you. So talk about how you got ingrained in working at the circus.
Yeah, everybody's sort of one of the first questions, when we start getting into, well, what have you done in your career, or we're considering you for something, whatever it is, right? It's like, where did you get your MBA? That's kind of one of the first questions, right? Yeah. And I always answer, I didn't. But everything I learned at business, I learned at the carnival. And that always gets a head tilt. Like if we were on video, right, I'd go, right? Sort of tip my head like Scooby-Doo a little bit. That probably aged me. Some of you may not even know who Scooby-Doo is. But anyway, my best friend growing up in high school, her parents owned outdoor carnivals and indoor arcades. And I was born and raised in Hawaii. So carnivals were pretty much year round, and it was used for schools to sort of raise money. And we had a state fair and the whole 9 yards. And it was really rides and games, not animals type of a carnival.
Yeah.
And so, I'm like 15, 16 years old, and her mom was one of the very first female presidents of YPO. And, so I didn't understand what that all meant when I was 15 or 16, but I got a master's class in business, how to hire, how to, help people sort of be better at what they're doing, sales, marketing, ordering, supply chain. We would build and break down, $1 million date. This is in the 1980s. Like we would build and break down a carnival in a 72-hour period. And then we'd move on like the following weekend. So we would just sleep in containers with teddy bears. And, that was hard work. I feel like I've never worked as hard as I did then. And so, when I went to college and I was going to get an undergrad in business administration, it was a little flat for me. I was kind of like, boy, I've been doing this for 4 years. And of course, when you're 19, you think you know everything. So I'm like, what can I learn from this professor and this book?
Yeah.
But, I think that entire experience stays with me every day. And some days I actually reflect on something she has said to me that then I would then share, when I'm speaking with an executive or a client, or I'm on stage, I share the story, whatever it is, or on a podcast like this. Yeah. So, it was one of those for sure, absolutely pivotal moments in my development as someone in business, but more importantly, personally and professionally.
Absolutely. So with that, and you kind of hinted at it, you end up going to college at, I think it's Arizona State, right?
Yes.
And so as you go there, you would think, oh my gosh, very natural progression. You're just going to rock and roll through all these classes. But there's someone there that makes a comment to you about maybe it's not the right fit. So talk about that comment to you and maybe a little bit of a fire that could have got started there.
Yeah, it was the beginning of my sophomore year. And, I'm going to put this all in context here. Wasn't a great student. Not like I had 40 schools to choose from that let me in. Like I had 2. So I picked Arizona State because it was, it was the top party school. Like, let's just, kind of call it as it is. All right. So I pick it. And I also was playing on the practice squad for volleyball. It was a very strong volleyball school as well. And it was kind of the beginning of my sophomore year, and my college counselor's like, okay, let's do a review of your freshman year. Now you have to kind of pick what you want to be when you grow up, sort of a thing. Like you got to pick your major.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I just thought I'd continue with business administration, some way, shape or form. That's what I think I'm going to do. And she's like, I don't really think business is for you. You're not really excelling in the classes. And, it was really grades based, which I can't disagree to her assessment. Like, it's not like I was getting A's. I wasn't getting F's, but I wasn't getting A's. I was sort of getting C's. And It was because I just wasn't inspired. Once again, going back to
Right.
that story I just told, 19, you think you know everything, kind of what am I going to learn? And, for example, they'd be talking about supply chain. I'm like, that's not really how it works. I don't know about you, but getting teddy bears to Hawaii has to happen on a boat or it's too expensive. And if something happens to the boat or the container falls off in the middle of the Pacific, you don't have teddy bears and you have, 10,000 really upset kids.
Yeah.
So that's my reality. But these
Right.
4 lines in this book, if you think that's what supply chain looks like, and here we are in the middle of a supply chain crisis. So
Yes.
a lot of those things have never really been fixed. But so she kind of, I don't know if she guided me, but a strong guide towards picking another undergraduate degree. And I was doing really well in this criminal justice class. She's like, why don't you pick undergrad of criminal justice and pre-law. And I said, I always thought maybe I wanted to be a sports agent. So, how do I marry sort of business and sports and, all of those things. So anyway, long story short, I changed undergrad and, lo and behold, I tried to go down the legal path and that wasn't right for me. That was a personal decision that it wasn't right for me. And sure enough, I landed in business. And so, I think that if you're listening to this and you've ever had somebody say, this is not really for you, you have to do what you think is right for yourself and where you think you really can add value. And someone else is just not going to know that.
Yeah.
And so looking back, as you said in the intro, looking back, did I understand what that decision actually led me down? Because what if I had gone on to get a BA in business and went on to get my MBA? Would I have learned everything I learned the way I learned it? Or would I have been tainted by, the academia view of being an MBA?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things I want to highlight there and dive on. And so one of them is that idea of when you get feedback, right? We all get feedback from so many different people. And how do you discern between good feedback or feedback that you should really take to heart and feedback from people that maybe I should let it go in one ear and out the other ear? What would be advice for you, or what's been, kind of your experience in your career of taking good advice and actually discerning with it and using it versus, all right, hey, appreciate the info, but I'm just not going to take that.
Yeah, I'd say this. I'd say in this particular case, I was so young, I didn't know. I felt like a college counselor is going to know better than I.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's going to be my first. Okay.
Yeah.
While I sort of went, okay, whatever, really in my head, my inside voice was going, whatever. My outside voice was going, first of all, I wanted to graduate. So,
Yes.
I mean, there was also part of that, you can't really go home and go, I didn't graduate. That's not a good thing to come home to. So I knew I had to graduate. So that was also part of it.
Yeah.
But I would say, so sometimes people who are in, senior positions or have a level of influence over your career, give you advice and your inside inner voice is going, maybe not, but you do have to listen. I mean, in the end, it was better for me, because I probably would have gone down the path and spent 8 years getting an education, which wouldn't have been good for me. That's not sort of my passion anyway, learning that way.
Yeah.
But I would say that there's also been times even further down my career where someone, I was getting a promotion, I was going to go into management, and their first kind of comment to me was, well, you've never managed before. So what makes you think you can manage now?
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm like, well, everybody didn't manage at one point, everyone who's a manager wasn't a manager at some point. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? But what it taught me was, okay, I need to be more prepared because I hadn't been a manager before. So I read 90 days you first in your job, or the 7-Minute Manager, or I read a bunch of little books. Back then there was not TED Talks and things like that, but I tried to consume what I could. And then I also paid attention to managers I liked that were doing things that I liked and that made me feel good. And they didn't always manage me correctly, but that's because maybe I wasn't a great person to manage. So I think there's lots of things you can learn there. That one, if someone says, well, you've never done it before, how do you think you can do it? Then you really have to go, you know what, I haven't. I better be as prepared as I can be. I'm not going to know everything, but I better show up having done some work, not just kind of fake it till you make it, especially when it's management, because you have other people that are relying on you. It's different if you're doing it on your own and you fake it till you make it. But if other people are depending on you, that's sort of a different thing. So I'd say getting advice, there's always some truth to it. You have to be willing to be self-aware and self-reflect on, okay, what part of that am I defensive about that might be really good for me versus what part of it is just not right for me? Like I've had people say you should go on to get your MBA if you want to do these things you really want to do, which, by the way, for the most part, I've been able to accomplish without an MBA. There were things I decided not to continue to pursue for whatever reason. But if I had pursued that, I probably would have needed an MBA, kind of a thing, right? So that's what I'd say there. I think that there's always value in it. Understand the intention of what the person, who the person is that's giving it to you. Is it their defensiveness, insecurity, like what is driving it? Or do they really care and they're trying to guide you? Then you have to take that as a moment of reflection and take that sort of, advice to heart.
That's awesome. Good advice there from you. So next, I want to talk a little bit about hello pages. So talk about the idea behind that and kind of just the formulation of the business and the exit of that.
Wow. Okay. So you have done research. All right. So here's what I'd say. It was my boyfriend at the time. I was pretty young. I was like 25 or 26. And this is like 92 and 93, 1992, 1993, something like that. And I didn't know very much about technology. I was literally a paralegal at a law firm, right? I was sort of going, is that what I want to do? And he said, look, I've got this technology company. That's not kind of how he said it, right? But I've got this idea, I'm kind of using today's terms, right? But a technology company, he wanted to digitize the yellow pages and then make it available via something like 411. So I am once again really aging myself, but there used to be this thing, kids, called 411, where a landline phone, you dial 411, you'd say, hi, I need the phone number to, I don't know, Chuck E. Cheese, like whatever, right? Pizza Hut. And they'd go like, which one? Oh, the one on First Street. Okay, here you go. The number is, 555-1212. And no area codes also, by the way, back then. Okay, so there was that thing. There was no, let me look on my phone, let me go to the internet, let me talk to Alexa in my office. Like there was none of that. You called something called 411. So we were going to create something called on 711 where you could call and say, I actually don't know the name of the business, but here are the things I'm trying to accomplish. And it would have digitized the yellow pages. It did a massive Boolean search and then it would pop back. Oh, you need someone for car repair, around this zip code. Here are your 3 options. Do you want me to directly connect you? Like that was revolutionary.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So we wrote a prospectus, we raised some money. We had to move from Hawaii because people would not take us seriously. They're like, well, we can't really fly in to get a meeting in Hawaii. And I'm like, I don't know why not. Like, so that's kind of what got me to California. But we ended up doing really, really well. And it was my introduction to technology. And I actually realized it was exciting and it was interesting and it was all of those things. We ended up selling the business to a company out of Phoenix. And then, fast forward to like 96, 97, the internet was starting to show itself. So, that was sort of the end of that, but it was a really interesting ride, right? Talking to people about this very disruptive concept. I didn't understand back then the impact that something like that would have. And had we held on long enough, it would have potentially on the web been something very different, right? But that's not what we did. But what I learned through that was how to sell very conceptual ideas that made people go, wait, what? Like, why wouldn't I just look in the yellow pages, or why wouldn't I just call 411? So I think that was my introduction to really trying to reimagine what's possible with functions, jobs to be done, right? The job remains constant. I want to find a company, but the solution changes over time. And that was kind of my introduction to technology. And now it's been a 30-year love affair.
Yes. Well, and something that I thought was interesting that you had made a comment was, whenever you start a business, you would hope that it would just become this grandiose thing, right? The next Google, you'd get a huge payout, you'd be able to sell it and ride off into the sunset. And you go, it was a phenomenal learning experience for me, though. It was, it may not have been like this Cinderella story at the very end of it, but there were so many things that I learned in the process of doing it that then, transcended and helped me throughout the rest of my career. And so I think that's an important thing, is that sometimes we may have a idea of, well, if it happens this way, it's a success, but if it happens any other way, it's not success. It's what can you take away from the experience?
Of course. And if monetary, money is your only hurdle for success, you may find yourself disappointed a lot.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
And so I would say that, look, I moved from Hawaii to California. I lived for 3 years. My rent was paid. I had food on my table. I had a car, right? We had an office. We had all those things. We're being paid for by this quote unquote business.
Yeah.
Did I get a payday where I don't have to work another day in my life? No, but I don't know necessarily if that wasn't my goal at that age. I wasn't even thinking like, oh, I'm going to get this payday and never work again. I was just like, I want to make some money, but I want to have a good time. I was working with someone who I cared a lot about, and we had, an awesome experience. So that for me was good enough.
Yes, that's so good. So as you're now entering into the technology space, you spend a lot of time in different spots and different roles inside of technology. But something I'd like you to highlight is at this time, you were one of very few females that were in the technology space. So just talk about, being in the technology space, being a female in the technology space at that era.
Yeah, there was a couple things. Look, I really started getting serious to quote unquote find a job when I was about 28. I was just doing whatever I could do to have a good time and make enough money to have fun, sort of really in my 20s. And, I started working in tech, and lo and behold, what really happened was I changed jobs every 18 months, which back then was sort of a red flag to hiring managers. What, are you hard to manage? Like, are you not a good employee? Like, are you a flight risk? Like, people are going to invest in you and then you're going to leave. And I'm like, it was actually the opposite. I actually wanted them to invest in me. They weren't investing in me. They weren't giving me additional opportunities. Now, it wasn't like I want to become CEO tomorrow, but it was like, I kind of want to move up and get more responsibility and get more learning. And, I had kind of accomplished like hitting your sales quota for 12 quarters in a row. You're sort of like, okay, that's great, but can I manage somebody? Like, can I take on more responsibility? Whatever it was. And so I always gave them the opportunity to offer me or open a position or do something that would give me more of that sort of career advancement I was looking for.
Yeah.
So I sat them down and said, hey, look, I love working here. I love all the things, I'm looking for more. What could I do? And they'd be like, look, we really value you, that whole speech.
Yeah.
But give us a little bit of time. Let us come back to you in 90 days or whatever, and let's regroup. Yes. So I'd be like, okay, well, simultaneously of them regrouping, I'm out looking because I'm like, look, I want to be able to come back and be like, look, I'd really rather stay, but I have this opportunity, kind of using that leverage. And so each time, and it was like 5 times, they'd come back and go, we want you to stay. We just don't have anything for you right now. If you could just hang on for maybe another year. And I'm like, nope. Like, I'm out, and I would leave. And every time I left, I actually got more responsibility, got a larger title. I increased my base pay. I had more earning potential. So over the course of that decade of my 30s, I was doubling my salary, sort of my total TTC, my total compensation, almost every time I moved. Wow. So after I just said, it's not about the money, in my 30s, it was all about the money. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, my earning potential, this is when I need to make it. I want to make it and then I'll figure out sort of what I want to do. But I'd say that being one of the only women in the field at the time worked in my advantage and worked as a disadvantage. Yeah. And when it worked as a disadvantage, I just didn't pay attention. I was like, I'll move on. Like, whatever.
Yeah.
And I also think I wasn't really as in tune with it as I am now. Like, did I think I got something because I was a woman? And did I think I didn't get something because I was a woman? I never personally experienced it where I thought it was because I was a woman.
Yeah.
But maybe I was naive, right? Maybe I was naive, right?
Yeah.
I thought, well, I just didn't sell well enough, or it wasn't the right product fit, or, for whatever. I never went, oh, the reason they didn't buy from me was because I was a woman, the reason they bought from me was, now that was my experience. Others did not experience that.
Yep.
But I would say as I got more senior, then I really noticed the difference. Individual contributor level, not so much, right? You sink or swim on your own kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
But if you're sitting at the executive table of a Fortune 500 company in technology, which was kind of my last real operational role, that was different. I was the only woman sitting at the table, and I could see my ideas being passed over. Or I'd say the sky is blue. They'd be like, absolutely not. The sky is not blue. And then 3 seconds later, the guy across the table would be like, the sky is blue. They'd all be like, oh my God, the sky is blue. And you're like, didn't I just say that? And it was a pivotal moment for me because I woke up one day at the end of about an 18-month run at that particular company, and I didn't recognize myself anymore. Like, I was burnt out. I wasn't in tune with like what I wanted, who I was. I started to see myself compromising for what I felt was sort of best and right. Yeah. And I hit eject. So at the end of one of our last executive meetings, I walked out. Like, the meeting was over. I didn't walk out.
No Jerry Maguire senior.
Yeah, no Jerry Maguire, but although that was a great scene, I would have loved to have been Jerry Maguire. I said I wanted to be a sports agent, like full circle moment on that one. Good one. Okay. So I walked out of the meeting. I went home that night and I never went back. I sent my boss a note and I just said, look, I don't think it's a fit anymore. I'd like to unwind this. I know I'm on a 2-year contract. Like, what can we do? The business was going through sort of a sale and a split of the businesses. So it was a perfect time for me to go. Yeah. But I was like one of the last standing female executives at that time. And so once again, do I think that is why? I don't know, kind of looks that way. But did anybody say it? No, I just tell that story. Like, I don't know if that was the reason, but I just was not getting the kind of support I wanted as an executive, regardless of my story and who I am. I just wasn't getting it. So I bailed.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I appreciate you just shining light on that. That's a big issue today. So as you're progressing and you've done some of these 18-month stints at different places, there's a company that stands out to you. And you may not have known at the time that was going to be longer than 18 months, but you start with Gartner. And so talk a little bit about how that opportunity came to be.
Yeah. So if you now get any indication of who I am, you'd know I am a salesperson at heart. I love to tell stories. Like, I'm excitable, I'm passionate, I'm all those things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Gartner, if you don't know who they are, they're the largest IT analyst and consulting firm in the world. And they are academics. Okay. So who am I? Who are they?
Sounds like a naturally good fit.
Really good fit. But that was one of those big pivotal moments. So as I mentioned, I was burnt.
Yep.
I needed a break. I'd been on this merry-go-round, sort of doubling, working really hard. I was very, very early in the cloud. I was a Loquist beta client. I was Constant Contacts beta client. I was selling this thing called the World Wide Web from 2000 to 2004. Like, we were doing chat-based selling, recurring revenue compensation plans. Like, I was one of the very first to do all of those things. A channel chief standing up some of the very first cloud-based channel programs, right? Selling with systems integrators and solution providers and managed service providers. Yeah. And so when I said, I need to get off this merry-go-round, where can I use all that experience? Gartner was a natural fit because I could advise companies, whether it be a seller, a marketer, a customer service agent, a customer service executive, because I'd run all three. In tech, which is their specialty, and I'd only been in tech. While I might not have been running billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar businesses, I understood the language and all of those things. Okay, so that interview process was super easy for me because I just got up on the whiteboard and I'm like, I'm just going to sell you some of the things I've been thinking about, and a lot of the things I actually did that have not been done by others. Which, by the way, HP and Cisco and IBM and all of those companies are going to need to do it in the next decade. I guarantee you. And so why not let me, whom I already know many of them, like, and worked at many of those places, like, I think it's a good fit. So they agreed. It was week one and it was the kickoff. And if you've been to any kickoffs, right, we all understand that it's, you get together, everyone's in a room, the executives are on stage. It's very, inspirational and educational and all that. Okay. So I'm in one room with all the analysts, and the senior vice president of research is standing on stage telling this story. And I am in the very last row because, once again, that's where I would sit. So I'm in the very last row of this, massive hall at the Dolphin Resort in Orlando.
Okay.
And there's probably 1,300, 1,400 people in the room, something like that.
Yeah.
And he tells a joke, uses a quote from this philosopher. And number one, I didn't know who the philosopher was. Number two, I didn't get the joke.
So you felt like you fit right in.
I am meant to be here. Then, right? Like 90 seconds later, 2 rooms down, I hear the sales kickoff, the Rocky theme, and everyone screaming. And I sort of looked to the right through the walls, right? And I was like, I think I've made a horrible mistake. And so I knew like 2 people in the room. So I got up, I was walking out. I think I just looked deflated. Like, I've made a big mistake. I'm only 1 week in. Like, how can I unwind this? And the woman who hired me, like, pulled me aside. She's like, how are you doing? I think she could tell in my face, like, it was not good. Yeah. So we went and sat at the bar for like the next 2 or 3 hours. And she totally talked me off the ledge. Yeah. And it took me a couple of years, literally, to kind of get my sea legs of what it meant to be an analyst and an advisor and a consultant, because it's very impactful and influential. And so you don't want to take that sort of lightly. Correct. And once I kind of started to find my rhythm, then, I made huge impacts behind the scenes in some of the largest tech companies in the world, standing up some of the programs that have generated billion-dollar revenue streams for them. And I found a lot of joy in it. So that was my longest. It was a decade. I started as a research director and I ended as a research fellow, which a fellow is in academia, sort of the highest, ranking of having great impact. And there was only about a dozen of us out of 1,200 or 1,300 analysts globally. And I was covering a topic, really, quite frankly, was not that interesting to Gartner as a company. They were very focused on the CIO, right? The chief information officer. My audience was the chief revenue officer, head of sales, head of channels, chief marketing officer, chief customer service officer, that kind of person, very customer facing, not back office. And so I was kind of a band of one with a very big platform, a great brand. And, thankfully my clients and customers, our clients and customers really appreciated the work that I did.
Yeah, I love that. And as you were able to grow and really develop in that role, you got opportunities to start doing more speaking and presenting. And at one of your speaking engagements, and a comment had been made before to you that, hey, you should write a book at some point. But at one of the speaking engagements, you're presenting with Seth Godin, Brene Brown, and somebody that maybe has a little bit more clout that you wanted to listen to their advice says that same thing to you. So talk a little bit about that and what transpired from there.
Yeah, I had been just as part of my day-to-day, speaking was kind of part of what we did. Yeah. And I had the opportunity to be on stage with some amazing people that I'd met over the years, over that decade, backstage. I had known Seth Godin since 2001, right when he wrote Purple Cow, which is one of my all-time favorite books, still on my desk today. And as you mentioned, Brene Brown was speaking. Chelsea Clinton was speaking, Malala was speaking, and me. I'm not really sure how this all worked out, but we were all in the green room and everybody had a book, but it was pretty evident to me. Like almost every time I was on stage with someone else and everybody kind of had a book. Yeah. But going back to my story about college, like I'm not an academic like that. Like my mode of communication is speaking. I'm a listen, visual learner, not a read learner. So for me to write a book, even though I had to write for Gartner because we had to write research,
right.
that was painful for me because I'm not a writer in that way. And I really had to learn how to be a writer. So I always shied away from writing a book because I felt like, number one, I couldn't do it. It wasn't a medium I would be very good at. And what was I going to say? Kind of, that was sort of, and so there was a show that Oprah did, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. And she made a comment that sometimes in life, you get this whisper, and it's kind of a whisper in your ear of maybe what you should or should not be doing anymore.
Yeah.
Now, the topic of this particular show was a negative connotation. So I took the positive from it. Right. Yeah. But so is the whisper in your ear, do you listen to that first whisper? Or do you wait until it was a baseball bat or a brick on your head or, you fall from the sky, right? Kind of a thing. Like, do you wait for it to get really loud? Or do you listen to the first whisper? And so I had lots of whispers. You should really write a book. You should write a book. You really should write a book. So it's like whispers. And they got a little louder because it got more frequent. Yeah. And so I'm like, and I'm ignoring it. Yeah. I'm ignoring it. So I'm backstage at this event. We were in Boston, and Seth Godin and I were catching up, and I was telling him, I'm really contemplating about writing this book. And, he's written dozens of books. And so if you're going to ask anybody, and he knew me well enough. Yeah. And so he looked me dead center in the eye, put his hand on my forearm, and he said something to me. And then at the end of what he was saying, he said, "You really need to write a book." Yeah. And so I walked out of the green room, got back on the plane in Boston, flew back to Los Angeles. And all I heard, right, is the house falling on my head of Seth saying, "You need to write this book." And so that was the beginning of the journey. And what I had to do that was, make a decision on how was I going to make that happen. And right around the same time, Salesforce came to me and said, "Hey, we want you to continue doing what you're doing. Do it for us. We're going to create a position for you." It was a great opportunity for me to have a change. 10 years had been a little long, for all kinds of reasons. And I wanted to try and challenge myself to do different things. And so one of them was write the book. So that's how that happened. But I think the moral of that whole story is I think we all have whispers, and our insecurities and fear hold us back from doing something that we might be really good at. We might not be, but until you try, you just never know. So
yeah, I love it. So true. So you mentioned it. You've had 10 years at Gartner, and then Salesforce comes knock on the door, says, "Hey, we think you'd be a phenomenal fit." Sometimes making that transition is tough, right? It's, "Hey, I know everything about Gartner. I've been here 10 years. I can just kind of keep riding this, or I can take the probably more uncomfortable road and make a change and switch companies, reinvent myself or reinvent what I'm doing." So talk a little bit about why that seemed like, the right decision to you, and now what it is that you exactly do in your role.
So I'd say, look, I have quickly blown through these decades, but my 20s was, I didn't know what I wanted to do, right? It was just have fun, make a little bit of money, do whatever kind of a thing. In my 30s, I was like, okay, I kind of need to get my act together. And I burnt myself out. So in my 40s, I spent my entire 40s at Gartner. Literally, it was at my birthday in March. I joined when I turned 40, and I left my birthday in March when I was turning 50. Literally, it was a decade. So through my 40s was kind of okay, is this it? How can I start to wrap up what I have found to be things I'm really passionate about, and how can I have a greater impact than I have right now? And how can I also give back to a community, specifically technology, that has been so good to me over 15 years? Right. And so in making that decision, it wasn't difficult. As a Gartner analyst, I had attended Salesforce's Dreamforce event, which is our large customer event every year that's usually in person. And so our last one we did big in person was 165,000 people. I mean, It's massive. We take over San Francisco. This last year we did it, part of it in person. I don't remember how many people, maybe 5,000, 7,500, something like that. And the rest of it was online, which, online got us millions of views, kind of a thing, because more people could attend. But every time I attended that event, it was not like a normal technology event. I'd attended thousands, over the decade, right? Over really the 15 or 20 years. This one I left always wanting to be a better human. And because it was so woven into everything that they did, that when I was making the decision to go somewhere else, I could go for the money, I could go for the title, I could go for the can I really start to explore this purpose over profit, business being the greatest platform for change? And how can I take a portion of my time to give back to in other ways?
Yeah.
And Salesforce is absolutely set up for that. So it was a super easy decision.
Yeah.
And since then I've spoken at the UN twice. I've traveled the world and participated in all kinds of amazing events. I've done things at the World Economic Forum. And then all the things in diversity and inclusion, and plus all the amazing customers and clients outside of tech I've been able to engage with, because I'd been so, sort of boxed off into tech for so long. So it has been an amazing experience. I'm coming up on my 6 years here in a couple of weeks. And it's just been fantastic. So what I get to do here is almost exactly that, right? I meet with clients, I help them on, advice and consulting on better ways to grow the business, engage with customers, sort of all those kinds of things. And it's opened my eyes also to things I also had never considered, around using that kind of values of the brand and things like trust and, equality as actual platforms by which you can grow from, versus it just being all about sort of revenue, client, just moving that wheel up the hill. So, it's really an amazing place to be. They're just starting off writing my second book. They're all very supportive of doing that. I have a podcast, right? I speak around the world. And so it's just been, it is a dream job. Like,
yes,
it is a dream job.
I love it. Well, I want to ask one last question, then we'll wrap up for today. And that is, you've been named at least once that I'm aware of, probably multiple times, but one of the top 50 most influential women. And as I think about that, and I hear you tell the story, the person that owned the circus was a female, and the person that I originally connected with at Gardner was a female. There have been some pivotal people for you, but oftentimes in your career, you didn't have that person you could look to based on gender, just because you were in technology in the early stages of technology and it wasn't common. But what does that mean to you today, being able to be, a leading mind in technology, regardless of gender, but also specifically for other females that, can look to you as a person that they look up to and aspire to be?
Yeah, I call it my tribe. And sort of another way to describe it is sort of the orchestra of influence in your life. Yeah. So you have people who are drummers, you have people who are guitar players, you have people who are clarinet players and trumpet players and trombones. And when they all play together, it can be beautiful music, but sometimes you don't need the trumpet, like you need the drummer, right? Yep. And so I would say that I have been blessed to find a great tribe that supports me when I have questions. And I'd say the male allies in my life are equally influential. Yep. And so it's really both. Yeah. But I would say that finding those people that you trust that will give you candid feedback, whether you really like it or not. And, you have to reach out and establish those relationships, but then you have to nurture them and you have to be willing to give without a get back. Yep. Right. And so I think that now, while I'm flattered and honored, many people will come and say, hey, will you mentor me? It's a commitment. And so I don't do it as much as I could, if I wasn't doing all the other things I'm doing. But I think indirectly, I'm fairly responsive to my network when I can be, but I reach out all the time. And those that have been really helpful to me also believe in me. Yeah. And, they're like, no, like, Seth, you should really write a book. Like, I know you don't think you should, and I don't want you to keep saying you're not a writer, which I've said on this podcast 3 or 4 times. Like, I still say it today as I'm writing my second book. Like, I'm not a writer. Like, you need to stop saying that. Yep. I would say that my superpower is speaking. And so figuring out how do I get my spoken word onto paper, that I've now figured out how to do that. I've learned how to be a writer in the way I actually think and do. Yes. But I'd say that, surrounding yourself with people, and by the way, the relationships you make early in your career, if you nurture them and treat them with respect, will last through your entire career. So there are people who I've known for 25 years that if I reached out to them today, whether they were clients, whether they were people I worked with, worked for me, I hope, right? They'd be like, absolutely, how can I help?
Yep.
And so, that just means you just have to show up and, do what you say and say what you do, and, be kind along the way. And I think you will be very successful at whatever you try.
I love it. Well, Tiffani, we could spend another hour just talking about mentorship, but we've got time constraints. So I appreciate you just sharing your pivotal moments and highlighting those with us. And can't wait for the second book to come out. And thanks so much again for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.